Howdy everybody. Today I'd like to talk to you about stationary beings and how stationary beings manage to live. Of course, I'm talking about plants. On this planet, there's two major forms of existence. One is stationary, like plants, and the other is movable, like us, fish, birds, sheep. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to live your entire life anchored to just one spot on this planet. As a movable species, we really don't have a frame of reference to understand what this really would be like. The closest thing that I can come is being hospitalized. In the hospital, you're anchored to the bed. Usually, initially, you can't get out, and the hospital staff meets all of your needs. If you have to poop, they bring you a bedpan. When it comes time to eat, they bring you food. If you need water, they bring you water. You don't do anything for yourself, really, at least for the initial days in the hospital. So it's a very good analogy to think about. But imagine living your entire life like that. You'd have to develop a pretty good disposition, don't you think? You wouldn't want people getting angry with you because they might not come and bring you things that you need. So you would live a completely different life than we live as mobile species. I mean, think about it. You have to rely on others for your entire existence, not just for a couple of days, like in the hospital, but for your entire life. Think about what that would be like. In one respect, I've described the existence of a plant. That is, from a mobile point of view, because it seems like that's not a very rich life, but in reality, the plant actually does have a very rich life. We just don't have a frame of reference for understanding how rich it actually is. It's hard for us to imagine the life of a plant because our essence is one of mobility. That's what we are. The plant is stationary. And we live two different existences because of that. For example, we're hungry and we have a craving for, let's say, pizza. We go out and get a pizza and either eat it in the restaurant or we bring it back home and eat it at home. The plant, in contrast, if the plant has a craving for a particular, let's say, nutrient, it can't just go out and get it. No, it has to send out a message and hope that there is another organism around that can receive that message, interpret it, has access to the particular nutrient that the plant wants, and has a means or knows another organism that has the means to bring that nutrient to the plant. This is the existence of a plant. Most people don't know this, but a plant typically uses up the resources in the soil directly around it very quickly. Everything else has to be brought to it. And you might ask yourself, how could the plant survive under these conditions where they have to rely on so many other organisms? You know, what if one of them decides they don't want to do it? Well, it turns out that they have really good relationships. They're not like mobile species where we might have good relationships with some people and not so good relationships with others. The plants typically have a pretty good relationship with all of the organisms around it. And so it turns out that the plants have a lot of help, and it's help that they can really use. We walk on top of the earth, the soil, and we usually don't think about it, but the soil is actually alive.
It's alive, it's alive, it's alive.
It's teeming with life. Billions and billions of bacteria, fungi, algae, protozoa, and other single-celled organisms. Microarthropods, little tiny worms and micro spiders and stuff like that. And then macroarthropods, ants and roundworms and other things like that, and spiders, and including the larvae of other insects. So the soil has a massive ecosystem existing beneath our feet. So it turns out that plants have mutually beneficial relationships with many organisms that live in the soil. What that means is that the plants have something that the soil organisms want, and the soil organisms have access to things that the plants want and have abilities to bring it to them. So it's mutually beneficial. They benefit each other. You know, when I was in school, way back when, we were taught that the plant stem or the trunk was basically a hollow tube filled with a cork-like substance that allowed the passage of water being brought from the roots all the way up, against gravity, mind you, to the leaves, and then finally out into the atmosphere. That process is called transpiration. Well, it turns out that, that's true, but there was an overemphasis in what we were taught about transpiration, and basically everything else that the plant does was ignored, or at least was not known. We now know that circulation in plants is a very complex process that involves not just transpiration, bringing water and nutrients up to the plant, but also carrying or transporting things down into the roots and down and out into the soil. We were also taught that plants make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. Now, of course, this is true, but it left us students with the wrong impression that plants really didn't have to eat because they made their own food. This is wrong. The product of photosynthesis is sugars, and plants need a lot more nutrients than just sugars to survive. So where do they get that? They get that from the soil, but as I just said, they deplete that from the soil very quickly. So where do they get the rest of it? Well, they get it from their friends, those soil microorganisms that they have mutually beneficial relationships with. So digging a little deeper into this, the nutrients that a plant needs to survive are contained in healthy soil. The problem is that they're not in a form, typically, that the plant can use. And that's where the soil microorganisms come in, because they have the ability to convert those nutrients, not only to convert them, but to transport them to the plant in a form that they can actually use and thrive. Now, this process can involve just one soil microorganism, or it can involve a cascade of microorganisms, each one doing a particular job in a process that eventually brings that nutrient to a form in which the plant can survive. And it's this last one that is the most common. It's usually a process that uses multiple different microorganisms to achieve it. So not only are the plants working with the microorganisms are working with each other as well. So what do the soil microorganisms get in return for all of their hard work? Well, it turns out that many of them require sugars that are not in sufficient amounts in the soil for them to use. It turns out that the plant makes a lot more photosynthetic product than it actually needs to survive itself. And so it pumps this photosynthate, is what it's called, the process of photosynthesis. It pumps this down through the stem into the roots and exudes it out of the roots so that the microorganisms can consume it and they can live. So it's mutually beneficial. They're feeding each other. This stuff that the plant is sending down through the roots is called root exudate. And it turns out that it's not just food for the microorganisms, but it contains very specific chemical messages from the plant telling the microorganisms what it actually needs. So it isn't as though the microorganisms are just kind of hanging around guessing what the plant might need. The plant is specifically communicating with the microorganisms what its needs are. And that's pretty cool. Now, this is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do on this subject. And that video will deal with more specific information about how this root exudate that is sent down from the plant is not only used by the bacteria, but is also again transformed and given back to the plant to make the plant even more healthy. So I'll see you in the next video, and thank you for watching.